The story begins on the hot morning of 20 July 1944. The sky was clear, but on the ground, the fire of war was burning. In the east of Germany, in the dense forests of East Prussia, a plane was descending fast. Inside this plane sat a person who looked completely different from any ordinary soldier. His name was Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg. He looked like a hero from a film, but in reality, he was a war-stricken, wounded soldier. One of his hands was useless, one eye had a black patch, and on the other hand, only 3 fingers were left. But despite these wounds, inside him was a power and passion that no other general in Germany had at that time. He had a brown-colored leather briefcase. This wasn't an ordinary briefcase, and nor did it have documents inside. Inside this briefcase were 2 plastic explosives, which in English are called C4, and with them a chemical fuse was attached. This was the briefcase that was going to change the history of the whole world in the next few hours. If today's mission became successful, then maybe World War II would end right there, and the lives of millions of people would be saved. Stauffenberg's mission was simple but extremely dangerous: to kill Germany's dictator Adolf Hitler in his own home, in his most secure fortress. The place where the plane landed was called Wolf's Lair, meaning the Cave of the Wolf. This was Hitler's secret headquarters, hidden from the eyes of the world. This place was a maze of security, where even a bird could not flap its wings. There were 3 separate security zones, barbed wires everywhere, landmines, and SS guards watch, who could even give their lives for Hitler. Stauffenberg got off the plane and held his briefcase tightly. He knew there was no way back now. Drops of sweat were on his forehead, not only because of the heat, but because of the burden he was carrying. He had to attend a meeting with Hitler. This meeting was to be held in the afternoon, where Hitler was going to discuss the war situation with his generals. Stauffenberg's plan was that he would go into the meeting room, quietly place the bomb briefcase near Hitler, and leave before it exploded. But they say the first thing that fails in war is the plan. As soon as he entered Wolf's Lair, he received the news that the meeting time had been changed. Now the meeting would start early, and he would get very little time to prepare. Hearing this news, the danger bell began ringing in Stauffenberg's mind. He needed at least 10 to 15 minutes to activate the bomb. The mechanism of the bomb was very complex. With the help of pliers, he had to break an acid capsule inside the fuse. As soon as the acid capsule broke, it would melt a wire, and exactly 10 minutes later, the explosion would happen. But the problem was that Stauffenberg had only one hand, and even that had only 3 fingers. For a normal person, this work was easy, but for Stauffenberg, it was no less than climbing a mountain. He made an excuse and entered the washroom so he could prepare the bomb. His companion, Lieutenant Werner von Haften, was with him. The room was small and it was very hot. Stauffenberg tried with his 3 fingers to activate the fuse. His hands were trembling. Outside, the voices of guards were coming, who were telling him to hurry. "Colonel, the meeting is about to start. Führer is waiting for you." A guard knocked on the door. In this haste, Stauffenberg could activate only 1 bomb. According to the plan, there should have been 2 bombs, so the explosion would be powerful enough that no one would survive. But due to lack of time, he left the 2nd bomb as it was, in the bag, or maybe gave it to his companion, and proceeded toward the meeting room with only 1 active bomb. Now the moment had arrived for which everyone was waiting. Stauffenberg was walking toward the conference hut. Usually, Hitler's meetings were held in the underground bunker, where the thick concrete walls doubled the sound and effect of the blast. But today, due to the heat, the meeting was arranged in a wooden hut, where the windows were open. This was bad news for Stauffenberg, because in an open space, the effect of the explosion decreases. But now he could not stop. He entered the room. There was a long oak wood table, around which Germany's top generals were standing and looking down at the maps. In the middle of the room, across the table, Adolf Hitler was standing, holding a magnifying glass and looking closely at the map of Russia. Stauffenberg said, "Heil Hitler," and went near the table. He saw that there was empty space near Hitler's feet. He slowly placed his briefcase under the table, on the ground, just a few inches away from Hitler's legs. At that time, the chemical fuse inside the briefcase was burning, and at any moment it was about to cut the acid wire. Stauffenberg had barely 5 minutes left. His heartbeat was fast. Stauffenberg signaled to General Keitel and in a low voice said that he had to make an urgent phone call to Berlin. Saying this, he left the room. He had left the briefcase right there, very close to Hitler. As soon as Stauffenberg went outside, the meeting continued inside. Generals were discussing over the maps. And here, fate played a game that surprised the entire world. After Stauffenberg left, an officer named Colonel Heinz Brandt was having difficulty in seeing the map. Stauffenberg's briefcase was coming in his way. Brandt bent down, picked up the briefcase, and placed it on the other side of the table's thick wooden leg. Now, between Hitler and the bomb stood that thick oak wood. This was a small movement, a mistake done unknowingly, which decided the future. Outside, Stauffenberg was standing near his car, smoking a cigarette and looking at his watch. It was 12:42. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion. Boom! The whole conference room shook. The wooden walls flew like straw. The window glass shattered and spread into the air, and a part of the roof fell down. From inside came the sound of screams, and smoke spread everywhere. Stauffenberg saw this scene from a distance. He was certain that a bomb exploding so close could not leave anyone alive. He had seen the hut being destroyed with his own eyes. He thought the mission was complete. Hitler was dead. Without wasting time, he got inside his car and ordered the driver to go to the airport immediately. He had to reach Berlin so he could start Operation Valkyrie and take control of the German government.
Wolf's lair was in chaos. There was dust, blood, and the smell of burnt clothes everywhere. Soldiers were running with buckets of water to extinguish the fire. When the smoke cleared a little, the inside scene was terrifying. Generals were lying on the ground, some dead, some badly wounded. The table had blown into pieces, but among the debris, one man stood up, staggering. His clothes were torn, blood was flowing from his ears because his eardrums had burst. His hair was burnt and his hand was injured, but he was alive. He was Adolf Hitler. That action of Colonel Brandt, moving the briefcase to the other side of the table leg, had saved Hitler's life. The thick oak wood had blocked most of the explosion's impact. Hitler, who should have been in the mouth of death, was now alive, standing in anger and shock. Stauffenberg did not know this. He was flying toward Berlin, happy that he had saved the world from a tyrant. He didn't know that the storm he escaped from was now coming behind him, and this night was going to be very long. As Stauffenberg's plane flew toward Berlin, his mind was planning the next steps. He thought the most difficult task was completed, but the real war was about to begin. In Berlin, in the Bendler Block building, which was the German army headquarters, the remaining conspirator officers were impatiently waiting for Stauffenberg's call. Their plan was that as soon as Hitler's death was confirmed, they would announce all over Germany that the SS, Hitler's special force, had killed Hitler, and now the army was taking control of the country. The name of this plan was Operation Valkyrie. But no news was coming from Wolf's lair. Communication lines had been cut, but some were still working. In Berlin, General Ulbricht, who was part of the conspiracy, was afraid. He delayed issuing the Valkyrie order because no confirmed news was reaching him. This delay was going to cost them very heavily. 2 hours later, Stauffenberg's plane landed in Berlin. He ran to a phone booth and called his companions. "Hitler is dead," he said with certainty. "I saw the explosion with my own eyes. Start Valkyrie." His certainty revived the officers waiting in Berlin. They immediately began issuing orders. Tanks rolled onto the streets throughout Berlin. Government buildings were surrounded. It looked as though the revolution had succeeded. People were shocked about what was happening, but no one knew the real truth. Stauffenberg himself reached Bendler Block and took command. He kept shouting on phones, giving orders to commanders to arrest Nazi party leaders. In the darkness of the night, an odd tension spread on the streets of Berlin. On one side were those who believed Hitler was dead, and on the other side were the loyal Nazis who were trying to confirm. But then came the phone call that changed everything. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, who was also in Berlin, tried to contact Wolf's Lair. And on the other end, the phone was answered by none other than Hitler himself. Goebbels heard that his leader was alive. The officers standing with Stauffenberg now began to get confused. News began coming on the radio that the Führer had been attacked, but he had miraculously survived. When this news reached Bendler Block, the atmosphere suddenly changed. The officers who were supporting Stauffenberg till now began worrying about saving their own lives. They understood that the game had turned. If Hitler was alive, it meant the rebellion had failed, and the result would be terrible. Stauffenberg still was not ready to believe. He insisted that it was all lies. Hitler was dead. This was just propaganda. But reality was standing like a wall in front of him.
The night was getting deeper, and the sound of gunshots began echoing in the corridors of Bendler Block. Those officers who were loyal to Hitler began taking control of the building from inside. Stauffenberg and his loyal companions were trapped in a room. They had no way to escape. Outside, loyalist troops had surrounded the building from all sides. Stauffenberg was shot in the shoulder. Blood was flowing, but he still was not ready to accept defeat. But fate had already decided. At around 12 at night, General Fromm, who earlier may have thought of joining the conspiracy but now wanted to save himself, arrested Stauffenberg and his companions. Without any trial, without any court, he immediately announced the death sentence. He was afraid that if these people stayed alive and interrogation happened, his name might also come forward. That is why he wanted to eliminate these witnesses as soon as possible. In the courtyard of that frightened building, the headlights of cars were turned on so there could be light. Stauffenberg and his 3 companions were stood against the wall. There was a pile of dirt where they were placed. The firing squad stood in front, with guns aimed. There was a strange silence in the atmosphere. Only the sound of car engines and the breathing of these men could be heard. Stauffenberg knew this was his final moment. When the firing squad took aim, just before dying, Stauffenberg shouted with full strength one last time, "Long live sacred Germany!" And then the sound of bullets echoed. In a moment, the man who had challenged the strongest power in the world on his own fell lifeless to the ground. The night of 20 July was ending, but the echo of that night was going to be heard for many years to come. After Stauffenberg's death, a deep silence spread in that courtyard. But this silence lasted only for a short time because the thirst for blood in Berlin had still not been quenched. General Fromm, who had his own companions killed so that he could save himself, immediately gave the order that these bodies should be buried right there in the courtyard. He wanted everything to be finished as quickly as possible and no evidence to remain. The soldiers dug a pit right there in the darkness and buried Stauffenberg along with the other officers, with their uniforms and medals, into the ground. But this cunningness of Fromm did not work. The next morning, even before sunrise, SS soldiers reached there. Heinrich Himmler, who was Hitler's most loyal and cruel right-hand man, ordered that the bodies should be dug out again. They opened the graves, took out Stauffenberg's body, tore the medals from his chest, and then burned him and turned him into ashes. His ashes were scattered into the air so that every sign of this man would disappear forever. Hitler wanted that the coming generations should not even remember that a man ever existed who dared to try to kill him. Meanwhile, in the Wolf's Lair, Hitler had bandages wrapped over his wounds, but his anger was sky high. He addressed the people of Germany on the radio that same night. In the silence of the night, all across Germany, people turned on their radio sets. From the static noise came a familiar but trembling voice. It was Hitler. He said, "A small group, made up of mad and ambitious officers, tried to finish me, but Providence saved me." Hearing this, the hearts of millions who were hoping the war would end sank. Hitler swore that he would punish these traitors in a way the world would remember. And then began that era which is known as the Purge. The Gestapo, which was Germany's secret police, started conducting raids all over the country. People were taken from their homes on the basis of mere suspicion. This operation was not limited only to those officers who were involved in the plot, but even their families, wives, children, and even distant relatives were not spared. Hitler implemented a new law called Sippenhaft, which meant that the entire family of the guilty would also be punished along with him. Stauffenberg's wife and children were arrested, their names were changed, and they were sent to different orphanages so that they could never know their real identity. During this time, another officer stationed on the Russian border, General Henning von Treschow, who was Stauffenberg's closest friend and the mastermind of this conspiracy, learned that the mission had failed. He knew that now the Gestapo would soon reach him, and if he were captured, then under torture they would make him reveal the names of the others. Treschow decided that he would take his own life to save the others. He quietly walked out of his bunker and went toward no man's land, the area between the German and Russian armies. There he placed a grenade near his head and pulled the pin. There was an explosion and he ended right there. Before dying, he had told his companion, "Now the whole world will spit on us, will call us traitors, but I am certain that we did the right thing. Hitler is not only the enemy of Germany, but the enemy of all humanity." Trescow's death was first shown as an enemy attack, but later, when the Gestapo learned the truth, they had his body exhumed and desecrated. In Berlin, the series of trials began which were in reality nothing more than a drama of justice. These trials were called the People's Court, and its judge was Roland Freisler, who was a shouting, screaming man and was called Raging Roland. Video recordings of these hearings were made so that Hitler himself could watch how his enemies were being humiliated. The accused officers were made to wear old and loose clothes. Their belts and braces were taken away so that they would have to hold up their trousers in court and look weak. The judge shouted at them, abused them, and did not even let them speak. Those brave generals who used to stand in front of tanks on the battlefield were treated like animals there. The outcome for all was already decided: death. They were not hanged with rope, but on Hitler's orders, piano wire, thin wire, and meat hooks were used. They were taken to Plötzensee prison, and there they were killed painfully. Cameras recorded all of this so that Hitler could watch these horrifying scenes with his evening tea. Nearly 5,000 people were arrested under the accusation of this conspiracy, and most of them were killed. Among those who died was one name that shook all of Germany: Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Rommel, who was called the Desert Fox, was Germany's most famous and loved general. People considered him a hero. But according to the evidence the Gestapo found, Rommel also knew about the conspiracy and did not report it to Hitler. For Hitler, this was a very difficult decision. He could not publicly call Germany's greatest hero a traitor and hang him, as this could incite the public. So Hitler offered a secret deal. 2 generals went to Rommel's house. They had a poison capsule. They told Rommel, "You have 2 choices. Either face a public trial in which you will be humiliated and your family will be killed, or take this poison, and we will announce that you died of a heart attack, and you will be buried with full honors, and your family will remain safe." Rommel took the poison to save his wife and son. 15 minutes later, he died. The people of Germany were told that their hero had died due to war wounds. Hitler sent flowers to his funeral, the flowers that were actually sent by his killer. This secret remained hidden for many years. The price of the failure of the mission of 20 July was not paid only by these officers. The entire world paid it. If Stauffenberg had succeeded, the war might have ended in 1944 itself. But the war continued for another 9 months. And what did not happen in these 9 months? Germany's cities were bombed day and night, in which cities like Dresden were turned into piles of ash. The Battle of the Bulge occurred, in which thousands of Americans and Germans were killed. And the most horrifying thing was that in the concentration camps, the gas chambers work was intensified. The number of people who died in these last 9 months could have been saved if that briefcase had been placed just a little here or there. History is witness that sometimes a distance of 1 inch, a delay of 1 minute, or a small mistake decides the fate of millions of lives.
Finally, in May 1945, the war ended when the Russian army entered Berlin and Hitler committed suicide in his bunker. Germany was completely destroyed. Those people who had revolted on 20 July were initially considered traitors. For many years, even in Germany, people looked at them with suspicion, thinking that they had stabbed their leader in the back in a difficult time. But with time, the fog lifted and the truth came out. Today, in the same Bendler block where Stauffenberg was shot, a memorial has been built. Every year on 20 July, new soldiers take an oath there. It is written there, "You did not endure shame. You rebelled. You gave your lives so that freedom could live." Stauffenberg, Tresco, and their companions may have lost that night. They failed to kill Hitler, they failed to change the government, and they could not even save their own lives. But they did something that was perhaps more important than winning. They showed the world that when everyone was bowing before evil, when the entire nation had become blind, even then there were some people whose conscience was alive. They showed that Germany did not only have Hitler, but also a secret Germany, which fought for humanity. Today, whenever we talk about WW2, we remember that no matter how deep the darkness becomes, even one ray of light is enough. Stauffenberg's briefcase may not have killed Hitler, but the echo of that explosion proved that those who raise their voice against tyranny always remain alive, even if they lose the war. And this was that mission which, even though it could not end the war in one night, gave hope to the generations to come.